Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Try and judge how loud to speak at you. So as Mark said, I am Director of Strategy and Innovation at Taylors of Harrogate, but that's a new role. For the previous 8 years, I was Marketing Director. I have spoken at MadFest before about the journey that Yorkshire Tea has been on. I'm not going to repeat myself too much, but I will just do a quick recap on why on earth am I even here and talking about Yorkshire Tea. I think maybe the first thing I will start with is I know that not all of you will kind of know Yorkshire Tea inside out, so you might not necessarily perceive Yorkshire Tea as a challenger brand. Now, the key thing to understand is that Yorkshire Tea was created in 1977. In tea bag years, that makes it a youthful upstart. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing is that when I joined the business 16 years ago, Yorkshire Tea was in distant 4th place, competing with Twinings, had about 10 or 11% share of the UK black tea market. Fast forward to today, Yorkshire Tea is a clear number 1. We've got 39.1% share, and PG Tips and Tetley, that used to have roughly 2/3 of the market between them, are now down in the low 20s and the high teens. So things have really turned around. So if you were doubting like Yorkshire Tea's challenger credentials, that would be my pitch to you. So this is the key message first of all. Yorkshire Tea has grown and grown and grown. And I'm not going to do too much boasting today. There is a nice story to tell about Yorkshire Tea, but soon I'm going to switch into talking to you about the stuff that we've struggled with and the lessons we've learned. But it is worth just clocking. That red line is us, and then you can guess what the green and the blue line are. I thought I'd spare their blushes by not naming them, but they're the kind of titans. So yeah, we've grown and grown and grown, and this time period actually, this refers to from 2016 to now. That is the time period that we've been running our most recent ad campaign, our platform where everything's done proper. I don't know how many of you have seen these ads on TV, but our TV advertising has been our strongest weapon in that growth. We've used mass media and a pretty consistent platform about properness, and we've used recognisable, loved celebrities who are experts in their field to sort of play around with this idea of doing things properly. So that's one of the ways that we've succeeded. The second thing is that we've been pretty active in getting involved in culture. There were loads of more of these I could have shared, and I won't go into detail on these. You've got your social distancing teapot video, a piece of content we launched during the pandemic, which went down very well. We are also the people responsible for the fact that there's now a teapot emoji on your phone. We didn't make it, we just lobbied for it and made it happen because it was an injustice, it didn't exist. And I've talked about these things lots of times, but we've got embroiled in many a debate on Twitter, and we're not shy about getting involved in those things. And I think those have stood us in good stead. And then the last part of the mix is our fans. Sometimes, you hear a brand talk about its fans and you think, come on, get real, you're a product. But we do genuinely have fans. So we've got people that will wave flags at festivals. We've got people who will feature us at their wedding. We've got people where we'll take pride and place in their birthday. Or we've got people that will tattoo the brands onto their arms. So I think we've definitely got fans, and that's been a part of how we've succeeded. So that's good. So you could say, we're the king, right? We've made it to number 1 by a long way. We've kind of won if the battle's over. So how do we avoid being in that position and then finding ourselves in this position? So we just need to make sure that we don't go flabby, we don't become complacent, we keep that challenger spirit alive. And probably the main thing that we do to do that is zoom out and just remember our context. So yes, we might have won this race, but I'll just point to this. So that is the tea category in the UK. The line is going in a bad direction. This chart actually is going all the way back to 1974, so you can kind of see it's not a new trend. We used to be a nation that drank loads and loads of tea, and then over the last sort of 2 generations or 3 generations, we've gradually swapped out tea for other drinks. And it's not just coffee that's the enemy, it's tap water is probably one of the biggest things that's changing what people drink, but it's also the rise of lots of different soft drinks. It's the rise of lots of different interesting alcoholic drinks. So the drinks options available to the British public have just proliferated, which is really hard when you're kind of like in this classic category that used to dominate. So I find that chart both deeply worrying, but also incredibly motivating, because you just think, right, well, we cannot rest on our laurels because that is happening. So we have to think, we have to innovate our way out of this. And there's kind of two main ways in which we can innovate our way out of that problem. So one of them is that we can think of smart, clever ways to reposition our existing product, our existing brand, and try and become relevant to new audiences or lapsed audiences. And then the second one would be, okay, if that doesn't work, then what about looking at the product itself? How could the product change? How could we develop the product over time? I'm going to show you a couple of examples of things that we've already done. So one of them would be this video we launched last year. I'll just play a little snippet. I'm not going to subject you to the whole thing.
Let's get lightly caffeinated. Holiday time, no damn ups. Pack my kettle and pack my cups. Don't want to be a cheeky tea. On the holiday, I can't get a decent cup of tea. Trunks, leave it, no rum. Tea, pack it, pack it, pack it. Shades, leave it, no rum. Tea, pack it, pack it, pack it.
Right, it's quite enough of that. But just if you liked that little taste, there's a whole 3 minutes of that that we released on YouTube last year. It's still highly relevant today because it's basically just celebrating the true but really weird fact that British people often pack tea when they go on holiday. Because when you go on holiday, even if there is tea, it isn't made the way you like it at home, and people can be quite particular. And I think that's a lovely example of where we're trying to work with something quite classic, which is our love of tea and tea culture, but we're trying to play with it. We're trying to mock it at the same time as celebrate it. And that's been a real theme for us. But obviously we are flexing our brand tone of voice to see if we can reach different audiences and different spaces. So far, so good. This second example is something called BrewBot, which is basically, that's a QR code if you wanted to have a go at this. But we're dabbling with AI. Not in a kind of like spooky, generative, fake way, but just let's have a bit of fun with it. So BrewBot basically will allow you to use your phone's camera to scan your cup of tea, and it will tell you what tone, colour tone you've made your tea. And it's just an interesting way to sort of build a picture of how people like their tea. And it's also something we've discovered people are very, very particular about, and they take quite a lot of pride in getting it exactly right. So for me, I think these are just two small examples of how we're trying to play around to keep the Yorkshire Tea brand fresh in the way it presents itself to audiences. And then the last one would be changing product. So in the last few years, we've also innovated into flavoured teas. We started out really safe, really conventional, with things that were basically a twist on Earl Grey. And then a few years ago, we launched Biscuit Brew, which is a tea that tastes like tea and biscuits. So you can have the joy of the biscuity taste, but you don't get any of the worries about the calories and things like that. Or you can have biscuits and have biscuits squared, which might blow your mind, but it's worth a try. We followed up Biscuit Brew with Toast and Jam Brew a few years ago. That one incurred the wrath of Piers Morgan, who is a Yorkshire Tea fan, but he doesn't like it when we do anything new and different. But his wrath was actually quite helpful to us, and we sold out in the first couple of weeks. This week we actually launched Caramelised Biscuit Brew, which for legal reasons we can't say Biscoff, but you might think Biscoff when you taste it. So that's examples of some of the innovation and some of the different thinking we've been doing. But I guess what I'm here to say is that we're really just scratching the surface there. So that kind of product innovation, yes, it's incremental and it's helpful, but it's not breaking through. And if you think that one of the biggest things that's going on is so both young and older people are not making as much tea as they used to, and it's because they've got all these different options. Particularly with young people, though, what we're finding is that hot drinks overall are just not as big a fixture in their lives. So putting the kettle on in a constant way is a much rarer thing. And actually what's much more common is grabbing something and drinking it on the go. So this whole area of kind of cold drinks and interesting cold drinks is something that we've had to think long and hard about. But I want to go back to this point about innovating again and thinking. And I guess one of the key things I wanted to say is that this is not an area where I think I'm standing here saying we've nailed it, we know how to do it. Instead, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to share some of the struggles that we've had as we've been trying to work out how to be more breakthrough with our innovation, how we can really come up with disruptive thinking. And I'm going to cover 3 principles that have really helped us when we've been trying to push our thinking and make sure that we're not being too safe. So the first one This is going to be familiar to anyone who knows the author Jim Collins and the book Great by Choice. So in our innovation, we think in terms of bullets, not cannonballs. So the analogy goes that when you fire a cannonball, if you hit your target, great, because it has a huge impact. But the problem with a cannonball is you use up all your gunpowder to make that one shot, and if you miss, you're in trouble. It's going to take you a long time to regroup, readjust, and fire again. Whereas with a bullet, you can fire a bullet, and if you miss, no bother. You can just retarget, fire again. And if you're slightly off target, you can readjust and fire again. And when you are on target and you're confident of where you're aiming, that's time to get the cannonball out, because you've done some prototyping and some relatively safe testing. So it's not rocket science, but for us, it was quite a key principle to make sure we were innovating, we were thinking in a brave way. The second one is ask yourself a question. Do you want to be a small big thing or a big small thing? Now, what I mean by that is that Yorkshire Tea and Taylors of Harrogate, it's a family business, and we're in this funny little potential limbo space where we're not a small startup anymore. We're not a family-owned, entrepreneurial, tiny business, but we're also not a big multinational with the budgets and the scale of people like Unilever or Lipton. So we have to really think, like, well, what do we want to do? So what we're trying to lean into is we want to be a big, small business, which is still think like a small business, still have that culture, but recognise that we have got more scale. So how do we leverage that scale? Don't fall into the trap of trying to replicate the Nestlés of the world, because they will outspend us, they will beat us if we play them at their game. So that's the thing. When you're in the middle, try and convert that from, instead of being a limbo, try and make that into the sweet spot. That's the hope, anyway. And then the final one is this concept of tight and loose. So because we're going through these growing pains as an organisation, we are simultaneously trying to make sure that some of the scrappier parts of our business that were family run and are a bit organic and make it up as you go along, they don't work anymore now we've reached this kind of medium size. So, for example, like our factory, it's really important that it's run with scrupulous efficiency. But that same mindset, when you're then trying to tinker with innovation and you go and talk to some people in the factory about a new idea you've got, but it's going to slow them down and it's going to bring their efficiency down. You know, those two cultures, they don't gel very well. So what we've had to do is have a very conscious effort that we're trying to separate the big core that needs to focus on being super efficient, and then this tiny little offshoot that can afford to play around and have room to experiment, have room to get things wrong. Of all the things I've just spoken to you about, that is by far the hardest bit, to have a culture that is pulling in two different directions at once. And I'm not standing here saying we've nailed it, and it might be that some of you can relate to this and you're going through this too. What we have done, though, so I'm going to introduce you to something called the Sipping Forecast. So the Sipping Forecast it's a website. It's a D2C e-commerce platform of ours that we are currently using to road test different innovation. The Sipping Forecast was actually born out of something else. So we created an e-commerce site called Discovery, which is where we were trying to build a premium artisan coffee D2C business, because we could see the growth in that area. Taylors of Harrogate also makes coffee that we sell in the supermarket, but we were trying to work out, could we exist in this space? Could we build a business? And the answer was actually no. So we tried, and I think what we found was that market is saturated. The cost of customer acquisition is just too high. It was taking us too long. And also trying to move from being a mainstream grocery brand, even if we're quite loved and respected, when you go into that artisan space, we didn't fit there. We didn't have the kind of strengths that we needed to win. So over time, painfully, we concluded Discovery was not working for us. But rather than completely mothball the whole thing, what we realised was that at the same time as doing this, we'd actually built within our big core business a tiny startup. And this tiny startup had the ability to go from product concept to product prototype to samples that we could actually sell. So we weren't just sort of testing them by giving them away for free, but we were selling them to people who were parting with their hard-earned cash, so that we could get feedback from them. And all of this was happening in a way that didn't disrupt the big business, right down to boring things like it didn't use the same financial reconciliation system as our big core business. So it just was a fast track to get through lots and lots of process and bureaucracy hurdles. So before we completely binned off discovery, we realised, hang on, there's some jewels here, so we converted that into the sipping forecast. It is still a work in progress. We're not trying to turn the sipping forecast into a customer-facing brand particularly. If that happens over time, wonderful. But really, it's just a platform for us to take an idea and get it out into the world. And then finally, these are two such ideas that we use in sipping forecasts to road test. So one of them is Yorkshire Tea moving into cold drinks. So there's a variety of different ways that Yorkshire Tea could do cold drinks. One of the ones that we find particularly interesting is kombucha. I don't know if anyone is... kombucha is now doing pretty well, and we're in the right part of London for lots of people to know what kombucha even is. It's still not really a national thing, but we find it interesting for a variety of reasons. Kombucha is basically made from tea. It usually has a tea element, and then it's fermented. It's got interesting gut health properties, which plays well into not just cold drinks and refreshment, but the whole health trend. It feels like it's possibly a more interesting way for Yorkshire Tea to go into cold than to just go straight at iced tea. But at the same time, what do we know? It could be, it might be that there's a better thing to do. So this is actually our second iteration of kombucha, and it's a bullet. It's a bullet that we're firing. So we've only produced about 5,000 cans of it. So if it fails, we won't have bankrupted ourselves. We hope to learn a lot from it, and that there'll be a third iteration and maybe a fourth iteration. One of the other things that we're doing is that kombucha, it's not just the sipping forecast that we use, because obviously it's very limited reach if we just stick to our little website. We're experimenting with doing these kind of prototypes on big channels like Amazon. So obviously there are lots of small businesses using Amazon. Why can't we have a go at that too? And what we found was when we put kombucha on Amazon, the kind of conventional wisdom was if you put something on Amazon but you don't put the spend behind telling people it's there, it might as well be at the very back of the warehouse or under the counter. But what we found is that the word of mouth and the kind of love for Yorkshire Tea has meant that once kombucha was out there, that it's actually flying through Amazon, which is good. And then the second thing is we've had some interest from some retailers, because some retailers are also getting wise to this idea that the age-old conventional way of doing NPD launches is not a guaranteed success. So they're quite interested in this whole area of doing small tests. So we actually, for any of you who are down from the north, you'll know the supermarket chain Booths, which is like the north's equivalent of Waitrose. So we are working with Booths at the minute to do a small trial of kombucha sold in their stores over the next few months, and we'll then monitor how it goes and decide whether there's legs in this concept. So that's Yorkshire Tea kombucha. And then just a little shout out for the other side of our business. So Yorkshire Tea is the dominant part of Taylors of Harrogate, but Taylors of Harrogate also makes coffee, and coffee is also subject to all sorts of disruption. It's a much more competitive space actually and very dynamic. So we are considering all sorts of different innovations within coffee, some of which feel very obvious and we could take to a supermarket tomorrow. Some of them feel like they're more left field and we need to see where they go. And coffee extract is one such example. So this is essentially just concentrated cold liquid coffee that you can then dilute with either hot water or hot milk or cold milk and make a delicious coffee. An idea like that has been around before. The key is that the process to make it has got better. So that is now much closer to a proper cup of coffee when you recreate it. Another advantage of this approach is we might have had in mind who we think this is going to work for, but over time, because we're taking a much kind of like de-risked and open-minded approach to our innovation, we are therefore open to the idea that we might have thought this was going to work well for the older consumer who occasionally needs to make proper coffee in a hurry. And actually what we're finding is this is really popular with younger drinkers who maybe don't like Taylor's core product, but they really, really love iced coffee, and this makes a delicious iced coffee. How am I doing for time? 1 minute. Okay. So that was it, really. I wanted to tell you a story about how we are trying to get our heads around innovation, how a little family-owned business in Yorkshire that has kind of grown and grown beyond its wildest dreams, deep down is often quite cautious, conservative, conventional and safe. But we recognise we can't be like that if we want to succeed in innovation. So those principles are the principles that we've identified that we think are going to help us come up with the ideas that will be the next big thing for the future generations that own our business. So that's it. I'll just close by saying thanks. But before I close completely, I shared a fact at the start of my talk. If anyone can remember the fact, I have a prize for you. So, hands up, and I'll go to the first person I see put their hands up. If you can remember the year I said Yorkshire Tea was created. This lady just here was the first hand. Correct, you win. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that.